Hello, I'm Mike Callicrate. I wanted to follow up some on a presentation I gave at RCAF USA here this last month up in Rapid City, South Dakota. I asked the question, how many folks here in attendance know who Bob Peterson is? How many of you have heard of Bob Peterson? Isn't that interesting? There's a whole generation. There's a whole generation that hasn't heard of Bob Peterson. And hardly any hands went up in the room, and understandably so. It's been years since Bob Peterson was with IBP, the biggest meat packer in the world at the time. But it was also that time in our industry when the big packers really stole the producer's share of the consumer dollar. And they did it really through concentration consolidation, but also through controlling what we call captive supplies. And this is the meat packers' inventory of cattle or livestock outside of the competitive cash market. And these are animals that they can slaughter and not have to worry about going out in the market and bidding up on those cattle. So as a result, we ended up in 1970 with about 68% of the consumer dollar going back to the farm and ranch gate, the cattle producer. And that got as low as 27% during COVID, but consistently was running around 36%. So you can see that the producers really lost a huge share of their consumer dollar. And so I want you to watch this exchange that we have at the Governor's Conference with Bob Peterson, the president and CEO of IBP. And Bob Peterson was the CEO of IBP during its growth years. And he's there at the Cattlemen Beef Conference in South Dakota, just blaming all the problems of low markets on the ranchers themselves, blaming the problems of low quality beef on the ranchers themselves. In other words, blaming the victim. At the very same time, he's got his hand in their pocket, literally stealing their ranches and their cattle.
Andy, would you like me to read a little of the evaluation of how those studies were conducted? You don't have a clue what the level of captive supply is because any of the reporting is voluntary.
Well, Mike,
it's voluntary, and
Mike,
I can tell you today that one packer is totally out of the market, needs no cattle whatsoever this week.
Where did you get that rumor?
It's not a rumor.
Is it the same rumor
I'm a cattle
from
feeder,
the same
and
article you
I know
read?
what packers are buying cattle. And I can tell you this week, Montfort needs no cattle. You say captive supplies are 21%. I tell you that may be true someday, but what about the weeks when they're 80%? What about the week when IBP stepped out of the market in 1994, stayed out for 6 weeks? The cash market dropped $17.
That's a bold-faced lie. A bold-faced lie. We have never, ever stayed out of a market for 6 days, let alone 6 weeks.
I said the cash market.
Cash, any goddamn market you want. I've never stayed out of it, ever.
I understand, Bob. You have to buy enough cattle to
get your facts, tell the truth. Don't be running off the head when you don't know what you're talking about.
Bob, I understand you have to buy a few cash cattle to set the formula price.
You said we didn't buy any. And I've bought a hell of a lot every week that we've been in business, and I want to buy more. But don't say things that aren't true. That's the problem with the industry. It isn't true. It isn't even a little bit true. I'm telling you, we don't leave the market. This old stuff of how people leave the market is just not accurate. And I'll guarantee you, I don't have the foggiest damn idea, but you step right up here and I'll bet anybody $1,000 and all that want to come that Montfort bought cattle this week.
Hey, Bob, let me ask you one more question.
Oh, get the truth.
Have you done any formula deals with Cargill or ConAgra?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Have you had any formula arrangements with Cargill or ConAgra?
How many of you think we have? Raise your hand. How many of you would like to make a bet? And I'll let all of you who didn't have the receipts. It is, we have ladies in the crowd, I can't say what I'd like to say. It is absolutely untrue. There isn't a scintilla of truth that we have contract cattle or formula cattle with Montford or XL.
Hi, just a couple of comments on the exchange that Bob Peterson and I had. He talked about captive supply levels and being in the market every week. Well, as a result of the 1994 Bob Cook lawsuit against IBP, we found out through litigation and discovery that IBP actually had 122% captive supplies at the Amarillo plant, 22% more than the packer even needed. And of course they were going to be out of the market, but they had to buy just enough cash cattle to set those formula prices. But you can see they're not motivated to bid much on those cash cattle because it does impact, in fact, it sets the price on the formula. The other thing is, at the end, when I asked Bob Peterson if they had any contract arrangements or formula arrangements or supply arrangements with Cargill or ConAgra.
Let me ask you one more question.
Oh, get the truth.
Have you done any formula deals with Cargill or ConAgra?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Have you had any formula arrangements with Cargill or ConAgra?
How many of you think we have? Raise your hand. How many of you would like to make a bet? And I'll let all of you who didn't have the receipts. It is, we have ladies in the crowd, I can't say what I'd like to say. It is absolutely untrue. There isn't a scintilla of truth that we have contract cattle or formula cattle with Montford or XL. Not one scintilla.
Notice how he answered the question. He answered the question that they didn't have any deals with Montford or XL. Now, those are the packing divisions of those bigger corporations. And so Bob Peterson didn't answer the question correctly, but in fact, they were buying cattle from Cargill. And keep in mind that this is the influence, the Bob Peterson kind of influence, the IBP influence that's been present within the NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, since 1996, when those meat packers joined the board.